The fact of the matter is that the bulk of the emissions come from the north, but even more importantly, the bulk of the emissions come from the top 10% and in particular the top 1%. And for me, the problem with, again, the bottom-up approach, and I love the work being done by Just Stop Oil and Extinction Representative and so on. But what happened right at the start of the movement around climate change was that BP issued this story about our carbon footprints. And what that story tells you is that you, every single one of us, is responsible for this crisis, and we all have to change, right? And that is dishonest, really, because the bulk of the emissions comes from the north and the bulk of the emissions come from the top 1%. Now, recently there was the drama of the yacht that sank in the Mediterranean. I found that such a powerful analogy because, number one, super yachts emit far more than even super private jets do, right? Trillions of tons of greenhouse gas emissions, because not only does the yacht get used by the billionaire once or twice a year or in the summer or whatever, it has to be maintained for every day of the year, and it has staffing on it and so on. And what happened in Italy that night was that there was an extreme weather event. And what's happening now is that everybody's blaming the captain, but the weather event was extraordinary. It was a little typhoon that seemed to just home in on this yacht, and the yacht had a very tall sail thing, so it was unstable. It was more likely to be caught up in this typhoon than the yachts around it. But the fact of the matter is, the real cause of that crisis was climate breakdown and the extreme weather events that we see more and more of. What was amazing was the attention paid to those 7 people, some of whom were chairs of Morgan Stanley International and big companies like Hiscox and so on. And of course, the owner of the boat was a high-tech guy, Mike Lynch. Every day of the year, asylum seekers drown in the Mediterranean. Almost every day of the year, well, maybe not every day, but once a week, people drown in the North Sea. And we just don't cover it in our media. 7 people drown in an extreme event in Italy, and it went on for days, the coverage, the concern, the worries, the sadness. And it was a tragedy, no question about it. But for me, what that illustrated so clearly was the inequity and the inequality in this whole discussion. And so from a political point of view, from a point of view of the movement, it seems to me absolutely essential that we shouldn't just say, oh, everybody is responsible for this crisis, because everybody is not responsible for this, even within Europe. There's a Professor Kevin Anderson, he's the advisor to Greta Thunberg at Manchester University. You'll know him. And he has argued that if we got the 1% to cut their emissions to just the same level as 50% of all Europeans, we would cut a third of all emissions overnight, right? So what I feel is that the way we've approached the issue is to blame us all, and that makes us impotent. And it means, how do I change my lifestyle? How do I insulate my house by myself? I just can't do it on my own. So you then paralyze the movement into, sorry, but we know who's really responsible for this. Let's go after them until they change their habits, until they stop flying by private jets, and until they stop using big yachts. Then, only then, can we ask others to make sacrifices. And part of the reaction against the movements on climate is the feeling of ordinary people. For example, a small baker in the south of France who needs a little white van to deliver his bread to villagers, gets clobbered with a massive tax by President Macron, when he feels that, look, I'm just trying to earn a living here, and I haven't done very much. But the owner of the yacht gets tax breaks, or is probably avoiding tax, right? And so on and so forth. So I think the movement has to change the focus here and go after the real bad guys. And they include people like me. They include the top 10%. We are more responsible than 90%. And, we are the ones that have to change our lifestyle. We in the North have got to change our lifestyles. And I think until we do that, we're not going to mobilize the degree of public support that we need for climate breakdown. And I've already lost track of the next question.
So it leads on quite nicely, actually, Anne. So what role does the COP meetings have to play in all of this?
Yeah, so the UN is playing this very positive role of providing us with information and bringing everybody around a table, but it cannot, and it's hamstrung to act politically, really. That has to be done by the movement. And the movement has done an enormous amount already to raise awareness of it against the most extraordinary opposition from the fossil sector, basically, not just here, but most notably in the United States, where an oil man in the Democrats in the Senate, Manchin, destroyed Biden's Build Back Better legislation. So, this has been a big fight, and even so, the issue has been pushed to the top of the agenda. The BBC now does have to write about this stuff. So we've done an enormous amount, but we've now got to, in my view, hone the tactics and the strategy and to get much more and quicker results and more radical results than we've got so far. And the UN isn't the body to do that. The UN is a convener, if you like, of governments. It's not one, it can't actually change the direction of those governments.
Alex in the chat has just confirmed that the yacht was owned by Mike Lynch's wife via an Isle of Man company. Of course, the Isle of Man is a tax haven or crime haven, as
there you go. There you go. Thank you very much for that, Mike.
Bringing it down more to the micro level, back to Pam's question about, so what you view to the right to grow on public land?
Right. So, I think it's a wonderful idea. I belong here to a small community garden, and we have been battling with the county council who want to develop the space that we're in for housing, for private housing, with a touch of social housing on the side. And we are battling to hold on to that piece of land to grow food, which is what we're doing. We're doing it for our local community fridge and so on and so forth. It's absolutely a fundamental right that we should demand of a government, and especially if the land is left fallow and not being used. So all power to your elbow on that one.
Incredible Edible do fantastic things. So good luck with that, Pam. I hope it continues. Thanks, this event is being organised by Coops Wales, and we have a few questions about Wales in particular. Alex Bird says, in Wales, we're working to establish a regional and national mutual bank, Bank Cambria. It's a long process, but we're getting near to crunch point, working with partners and support from Welsh Government. So first of all, Anne, what are your views on community banks like this?
Well, it's a bit like credit unions. I first of all want to congratulate you if you've got this far. But I also want to say that managing a bank is one of the most challenging and difficult things you could possibly do, really, and a credit union. You're managing time periods, essentially. You're managing taking money in short term and giving it out long term sometimes. I think I think that's why I think banks should be public institutions, because they really are difficult to manage and very difficult to manage profitably, which is why our banks effectively are backed up by the state massively. I think it's a wonderful idea. The problem is, are you going to be offering very low rates of interest to your borrowers? And I would hope that you would do, because I have a moral question, a moral issue when it comes to interest rates. And indeed, I'm not alone. We've had 2,000 years of usurious debate about usury and about how unjust and immoral usury is. And it's a debate that's been lost. Jubilee 2000 was about the Christian belief in periodic cancellation of debts. So the question is, if you are going to, and I hope you do, offer low rates of interest, because low rates of interest enable the borrower to invest and to do something and to grow a return, if that return is not high enough to repay the debt very quickly, and that if the interest rate is high, then the rate of return on that interest has to be higher in order to give the borrower a living wage, but also the level of extraction to maintain that rate of return gets higher. So for me, there's a direct link between very high real rates of interest in our economy and real rates of extraction. We have to strip the forests of Brazil to repay Brazil's debts. We have to fish the seas in order to repay borrowed money by private equity firms and so on. So there is a direct correlation between very high rates of interest and extraction, both of human labor, but also of the Earth's assets. But if you charge very low rates of interest, you will not attract capital into your bank. And so there's this very difficult dilemma. It's one of the reasons why I think rates of interest should, if you like, be nationalised, and the government and the Bank of England should be managing rates of interest across the spectrum of short or long-term loans or safe and risky loans and in terms of inflation, in order to manage rates across the economy to very low levels. This is one of John Maynard Keynes's most brilliant interventions, was his liquidity preference theory, which led to low rates across the spectrum of lending. Wales does not exist in isolation and cannot exist in isolation. Wales is integrated into the global economy. We know that from the steel industry. It's owned by an Indian company. And for that reason, and that's happened because of capital mobility, because the Indian capitalist is able to invest in Wales and get his money across borders without any friction. When Indians come to England to work, there's a great deal of friction. There's a great deal of hassle for them to get across the border. If you want to trade Indian pharmaceuticals, there's a great deal of friction at the border, but not money. And Wales is, and I'm sorry if this sounds grim, but Wales is part of a much bigger picture. And the question is, how can we, within that framework, do things which are particularly Welsh? And I come back to the idea that, yes, of course, it's bottom up. Of course, it's building movements. Of course, it's making demands. But above all, and at the moment, I'm trying to write a book about the international system and how it governs everything that we do, is to spread awareness and understanding. Most people don't know how the system works. And actually, it's not rocket science. It is possible to understand it. But until you understand it, you don't know why you're angry. You don't know what you're trying to change. You don't know what you're trying to do. And let me give you an example. It was part of the Scottish Government's Just Transition Commission. We went to the Isle of Lewis, this isolated island, the Western Isles. And we went to a community-owned wind farm. It was wonderful. The story was amazing. They raised £15 million. No British bank would lend them money. They had to go to Spain. They raised £15 million. They built a road to carry the huge truck for the huge turbine, which they then installed in their village. And they would generate, in the year we were there, which was 23, was it 23 or 22 now? That the oil price was going through the roof. The energy prices were going through the roof. They made a fortune. And they were distributing this around the community. So that was all wonderful. And then we went downtown to Stornoway that night for a town hall meeting. And businessmen and women came up to us and said, it's all very well having this fancy gear at the bottom of my garden, this huge turbine, but I pay a price for energy which is going to wipe out my business this year. There was one woman who ran a wool business, and she said, I do all my trade in the summer with tourists. My winter bill is going to mean I have to close down my business for sure. They don't pay the price of that energy on their doorstep. They pay the global price of energy. And the global price of energy is not fixed in Wales or on the Isle of Lewis or in Britain. It's fixed in Chicago, in the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, where commodities are traded, right? And Mr. Putin doesn't fix the price, nor does the Saudi prince. The price is fixed by the market at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And Wales is as much a victim of that system as are the people of the Isle of Lewis. And so I come back to, I'm sorry about the big picture. I'm sorry if it sounds too big and you want to get down to brass knobs here, on the ground and, bottom up work. But in that context, it's not going to be possible. So I want us to spread greater understanding of how we've given away the governance of our communities, of our regions, of our nation to global markets. And we all love it because it means we can travel, we can go on exotic holidays. It means we can buy from Amazon anything we fancy. It means, do you know what I mean? We are partly responsible for it. So we can't complain too much because we do very well out of it. And we help to prop it up. But it's the thing that's making it very difficult for Wales, if you like, to be self-reliant, to build the kind of institutions and communities it would like to build. That's not to say it's not possible. And, the whole point about this discussion is that we should all be getting organized for that, to change that. But we have to begin with understanding. We have to understand that our government doesn't fix the price of energy, and the price of energy is going to hurt the people of Wales in this coming winter, almost more than any other form of economic activity. So I'm sorry about that.
So Mike Bird says that actually the most positive work we can do in Wales is to seek to spread understanding of how the economy really works, as Anne says. And it's fascinating what you're saying about frameworks, Anne, because one thing that is happening in the UK, of course, is the Law Commission review of UK cooperative law, which will obviously hopefully make it slightly easier to set up cooperatives. You've been speaking for an hour, Anne, so I'm just going to bring in Cliff Mills just to talk a little bit about this, give your voice a little bit of a break, and then we'll come back with some more questions if that's okay. So Cliff, could you talk to us a little bit about the Law Commission review, where it's up to, what's happening next, and then see where we go from there?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Yes, so Anne, company law gets continually revised. It's completely rewritten every generation or so, and most recently in 2006. Cooperative law, largely because it's such a tiny part of the economy and can't justify the legislative time, has never had a proper review before since it started in 1844. But as the result of a deal done last summer in the context of a private members bill, the government agreed that there should be a law. The previous government agreed there should be a law commission review of co-op law. And as you know, a law commission review is an apolitical process. And there's a consultation paper to be launched in mid-September. There's a real chance to do some quite significant changes to co-op law to enable us to do some of the things like have cooperatives that trade outside market conditions, which could then be supported by tax breaks or suitable tax arrangements. I guess the question is, would you, Anne, be willing to add your voice? Could we work with you in the context of this Law Commission review? Because as the co-op movement, we can command quite a lot of support from the cooperative movement, but it will be a slightly cheeky request, but whether you would be willing to talk to us and potentially add your voice to the calls for reform here.
Absolutely. No, I'd be delighted to. And I'm a little bit overwhelmed by work at the moment, but if we can fit that in principle, absolutely, yes.
Thank you. I mean,
I'm not a lawyer, but
it's you as the economist that we want.
Right.
And to answer Rebecca's question, there'll be a I think it's a 12 or a 16 week consultation period, followed by which the commission will then have meetings with people, and they will then come out with their recommendations.
Sure.
And those recommendations might be implemented by a government, but of course, with a Labour government, we're hopeful that they would give them some parliamentary time.
Sure.
But that's the process.